I would like to invite Dr. Sharat Kumar, who is the author of several books and several even award-winning books like Orange Moon, Mind Your Management, and also a filmmaker and former director of IMT Ghaziabad, to please come up and take over the session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think we should start straight away because our time has been constantly cut. Originally, I thought we'll have more than an hour. Then it became 1 hour. Now I'm told it should be 45 minutes. I need not introduce people right now. I think that when they come, we can talk about them. So I will take my 10, 12 minutes now. The subject which I've been given, art, culture, creativity, spirituality, they are big words. One could talk about them endlessly, but then when I discovered that the time is short, I jotted down some things which I thought are relevant and should be spoken. First thing is, I think we should grasp what is the overall meaning and purpose of these big words. What is the basics? As I see it, from the time we are born to the time we die, everything which we do is driven unconsciously by what is good for us. I think there are three fundamentals of life. One is the state of your physical body. Other is the quality of your intellect. And the third is the emotional depth of our connections. It is my feeling that of these three, the most important thing is our emotional connections. They affect the other two very significantly. We can see that our state of emotional connections affects physical health very easily. However, intellect, which appears to have acquired a dominant position in our life, needs this understanding, and I think the best way to do is to look at a situation where someone whom we care for is dead. We get so distraught that we can neither sleep nor eat. Our intellect tells us that you can do what you like, but there's no possibility of bringing the dead person back to life. It also says, don't you know that in a few weeks' time, you'll not only be sleeping and eating well, you'll also be laughing. We know that this is true, yet we cannot sleep and eat. It is true that we need a high level of intellectual ability to do anything which is important in life. But we must realize that all those who have done big things have always been driven by an inner emotional impulse. It was true for Napoleon, as it was for Mr. Gandhi. The foremost thing is to understand what brings us happiness. This is the core of everything which all the big words which we have before us. This is the ultimate effort is of bringing this. My father was a professor. My own experience of long years as the head of a major management school and several years on the board of Lady Irvine College enabled me to see that our formal systems of education are essentially for building intellect. They do not enhance our understanding of emotional life. In this situation, it is only through experiences that we learn about our emotional system. It starts from the very childhood, or even earlier when you're still in the womb. Long before the intellectual faculties develop in a child at the age of 7 or 8, his inner system has absorbed many experiences from his surroundings, the most important of which is the quality of his parents' life, which determines the mood which prevails in the house. When the parents have a pleasant relationship, the child absorbs a positive inner feeling that world is a good place to live in, and you can trust people. However, if there's unpleasantness between parents and there's a mood of constant tension in the house, the child learns that world is a dangerous place and anything can happen at any time and you cannot trust anyone. Obviously, harmonious and happy relationships can be built only with mutual trust. I believe that the quality of relationships we have with others is a major source of happiness, since it is our mind with its many unconscious fears and hopes which determines all our choices and actions. Refining it is the principal purpose of education. And this includes not only the arts, culture, creativity, spirituality, but also all religions and philosophies. It is only a refined mind that can build relationships of committed emotional quality. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, our present system of education does not deal with emotional aspects of life, even though they are the heart of human happiness. I think works of fiction provide a unique way of probing the baffling emotional conflicts of life. Reading a work of fiction that touches us deeply, albeit by proxy, it takes us deep into the subconscious recesses of our mind and gives quality to our emotional responses. It may not be out of place for me to mention that a few weeks ago, I read the former US President Obama made a statement that a substantial part of his continuing learning process was a consequence of reading novels. The relationship between a man and a woman is one of the most important parts of life. Unlike most other species, sexual aspects play a significant role in this relationship. Fearful of the intricacy and power of sexual passion, social customs forbid any overt expression of this natural impulse. Fictional works present creative nourishments that flow from a relationship between two people. It offers the glimpses of magic between two people, which is the choicest gift of one's life. Fictional works suggest reassessment of values that we live by. Traditions offer stability, opposed to the risk of freedom. The ecstasy and ethereal fragrance of love is not taken too kindly by the customs, traditional customs. But a resurgence of spirit inspired by love invariably tries to answer questions which are the real issue at stake. Where does the ultimate responsibility of the individual lie? In preserving life, no matter how insipidly lived, or in accepting personal answerability for one's own emotional, physical, and intellectual well being with all its risks. From the point I put forward, it is clear that the real question of refining the human mind, whichever way it may happen, is the serious question. Much more than any case of any intellectual faculties, emotional developments require a great deal of personal consciousness and effort. We can take a few areas illustratively where personal involvement may be by way of reflection of one's own behavior and actions can be of good help. Let's look at creativity. We need to keep our brain unsullied by the impurity of rough words we often speak unthinkingly. They lead to weak actions and negative results. Creativity demands a clean head, like the purity of a mountain brook. In my view, consumerism and creativity are mutually exclusive. Creative orientation comes from sources other than consumer culture. A degree of asceticism has historically been part of creativity. In the so-called fast life, we are driven to constant mechanical entertainment. We lose access to the subtle and suggestive, which lead to deeper mental activity, imagination, and creativity. Human brain is a giant computer, far superior to any computer created by man. It stores everything it hears and experiences, and hence it's very important to know that what we hear and experience lives with us for a very long, long time. The brain analyzes the situation based on memories to suggest actions, but the decision maker is always our antaratma, your inner self, which is beyond the brain in the hierarchy of human mechanisms. Words and tools are communication tools. Words are tools. They are symbols which draw on memories stored in our brain. They convey feelings and actions we desire others to take. However, our tone and body language can convey something quite different from what was intended. It is therefore imperative that we remain conscious of these aspects. The speeches of popular politicians are an excellent example of this. I've used the word literature to indicate literary works that have endured the test of time and are of lasting value. The power of fine works of fiction to further our understanding of human mind cannot be matched by robust scholarship, the great works of psychology notwithstanding. My earlier observations about Obama support this view. We learn from experiences almost as much as by reading great works of fiction. However, the characters of fictions become almost real in our mind. The right side of our brain, which controls holistic, intuitive, and random access features, which are the domain of literature. These are vitally important and complex decisions in making any serious thing which we have to decide. Lastly, I would talk about work and fulfillment. People need to work to keep their body and soul together. However, in the post-industrial world, Work has often become drudgery. Holidays and work have become independent areas. Holidays to nourish the soul, work to feed the body. We need to find our own ways to deal with this work culture that tends to eliminate the joy and pride which an artisan of earlier times found in his work. I've always been thrilled to visit the great stupa at Sanchi. I photographed it extensively. I'm always thrilled to recall the historical fact that the artisans who created these magnificent carvings lived on top of that small hill for 300 years. The craftsmanship was passed from father to son with joy and pride, with a great sense of fulfillment of living primarily through their work. In our own times, we can observe people making outstanding contributions to human life, be it Gandhi in politics, Einstein in science, or Picasso in the arts. They were totally absorbed by their work, which was most joyful experience of their lives. So I can conclude that great relationships and great involvement in work are the greatest gifts that life can bestow on any human being. Thank you. That's all that I wanted to say on this rather complicated subject, which is a big title of art, culture, creativity, and spirituality. Now, may I invite Dr. John Clammer and Shiv Jot Gill. Please could you come?
Good morning, everyone. This is Shiv Jot Gill. I'm a PhD research scholar with Jindal Institute of Behavioural Sciences. And I would first like to thank Dr. Sharat for their enlightening words, because actually the context that we are talking about, creativity, we are talking about spirituality. It gives an edge to the way of thinking. We have been much loaded since yesterday with a lot of politics, with a lot of spirituality, and at the end we are trying to discover the question of what exactly to do with this. How does human evolutionize? How we as individual, how we as society work for the betterment. That's the basic question we have. So basically, today Dr. John and I will be presenting on the topic, the politics of mysticism. Spirituality and mysticism has been discussed over the time by many spiritual leaders, by many philosophers, academicians, and we have come across with different versions of it since yesterday. Yet, in its classical form, these concepts are considered as some sort of heroic journey, which demand a valiant effort to follow a certain kind of path. Talking about the politics and mysticism, politics is a self-contested field, and usually it is assumed that the mystical thinking and politics does not share any common grounds and are separate category of thoughts. But history around the world reveals that mystical thinking have not only implicit implication for politics, but the originators of these thoughts saw that their thinking has a social and political transformative implication. So in brief, we are going to talk about first, the nature of mysticism and defining politics. Second, mysticism and art as tool for social imagination. And finally, serving the universe's purpose by eliminating the gaps between the social and the individual reality. So for the further discussion, I would like to call Dr. John.
Okay, thank you very much, Shiv. Now, time is very brief, so I'm going to run you through our little PowerPoint rather quickly to try to illustrate some of these issues. We have started with a brief definition of mysticism, which is an extremely brief one, because obviously this could be expanded, considerably based on the readings that I'm sure many of us have done in the actual experiential reports of those who've had mystical experiences, into deepening of awareness, into expansion of ideas of the self, into a more kind of cosmic sense of personhood and so on. But we have here simply a very brief definition of mysticism. And I won't go through all of these because time is so short. And likewise, a fairly conventional definition of the political, a notion which we want to contest a little bit, as you will see by relating mysticism and politics in hopefully some relatively fresh ways. As Shiv said, I mean, if you look back at the history of mysticism, it's quite clear that historically, relations between politics and mysticism are nothing new. And we could give many examples. I mean, in medieval Christianity, you will find numerous examples, of course, of people whose mysticism is also a form of social critique or relationship to society. You would find this in Judaism. We were talking about this just in the last session. In fact, if you look at the biblical book of Isaiah, it's probably one of the most revolutionary books you could read anywhere. It kind of outmarks his marks, right, in terms of its revolutionary potential. And of course, we also had a quotation earlier from Rumi, the Sufi poet, and the Sufi tradition within Islam. And we could reproduce many other examples here from the Indian context, for example. If you go back to the Bhakti tradition of dating from the Middle Ages to the relatively contemporary period, poet singers like Kabir and so on, you will find the same relationship between their mystical thinking and an idea of social transformation. And here are a few contemporary ones as well, in case you think this has disappeared, including Sri Aurobindo, another Indian sage. We got a wrong picture, actually, that's not sorry, of Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox is a former Catholic priest, you may or may not have heard of him, who's very much associated with a form of contemporary spirituality called, or what he calls creation spirituality, which attempts to relate mysticism to notions of creation and through that to notions of art and to politics. The picture in the right-hand corner, Rabbi Michael Lerner, is a significant figure in North American mystical thinking, author of a number of books, including one called The Politics of Meaning, which I would recommend if you want to follow up further on his thinking. What we're suggesting then is that what we find in a great deal of mystical thinking is in fact relationship to a redefined notion of politics in terms of some of the things we've listed here. New visions of life, new ontologies, new ways of being, new structures of society and of work, economy, nature, gender, and art or aesthetics. And if we, in fact, relate as we do, because we notice that this panel is theoretically at least to do with art, we thought we should talk a little bit about art, engaging a relationship between art and mysticism. And we'd like to suggest, again, briefly, 4 ideas to you here. First of all, that mysticism is itself a form of creativity. Secondly, that mysticism and creativity are ways of restructuring our relationship to what we think of as knowledge, a point which I'll try to expand very briefly in a moment. Thirdly, that there are, in fact, surprising continuities between art and mysticism. And fourthly, that both of them, art and mysticism, relate to the notion of what we've here called the social imagination. Social imagination being not simply imagination confined to art itself, but which spills over into much wider social and political contexts. Now, we've heard a lot in the last day and a part about the relationship, the inner and the outer, the conventional idea of those 2 dimensions. What we think is one of the major problems here is finding ways or methodologies to bridge that gap, to move from the inner to the outer or from the outer to the inner. And we'd like to suggest, in fact, that that's one of the areas in which we're probably weakest in thinking about how, in fact, to make the transition between those levels. And when we look at the relationship between art and mysticism, and indeed between certain figures in politics who have also tried to establish a relationship between their mystical thinking. Dag Hammarskjöld, the first Secretary General of the UN, an organization of which I worked at one time, it's worth reading his book. You think of the UN maybe as a largely secular organization. In fact, if you read Dag Hammarskjöld's writings, you find he was a deeply mystical person, concerned to apply that mysticism to the solution of global and international problems. We haven't got a picture of him here, but he's easy to track himself. Very briefly, since time is very brief, we want to suggest a set of relationships between mysticism, politics, and art. And here they are very briefly, and I will just say something very quickly about each one. Firstly, conventional definitions of politics almost always invoke the notion of power. And we're suggesting that there are concepts of politics which lie beyond the conventional forms of institutional politics and the understanding of politics as power relationships, firstly. Secondly, that when we talk about the notion of globalization, we often think of globalization in economic terms, in the more conventional ways in which globalization is conceived. But it seems to us that the mystical tradition also suggests commonalities between cultural and religious traditions, which form a kind of globality of unity, in a sense, between people, quite different from the notion of globalization as conceived in its conventional economic terms. Thirdly, that in most of the mystics, we would argue, sorry, the time is too brief to give you many examples here, we find the teaching of a kind of radical equality, whether in terms of class, gender, caste, or other kind of social divisions, the removal, in many cases, of human hierarchies. Fourthly, knowledge. We assume that most of the knowledge we acquire through our education is the only form of knowledge available to us. We're suggesting that there are ways of rethinking the categories of knowledge itself, new epistemologies, that is to say, ways of reconstructing the categories through which we think about the world. And that with renewed categories of knowledge, it's possible to have new visions of the world and also to cross that bridge between, if you like, the inner and the outer. And also that the relationship between mysticism and art, we mentioned just a moment ago. And finally, something which actually, curiously, I haven't really heard talked about in the last day and a half, which is our relationship to nature. And indeed, in a great deal of mystical thinking, there's a deeply cosmological and, if you like, ecological vision. And we would suggest that bringing that vision back into the kind of discourse we're having is itself a very important way in which mysticism and the larger world are related to one another. So that's our basic idea. And let me go back now to Shiv Jot, who will try to pull this together in the next minute or so to wrap up what we're trying to say here.
So basically, in this presentation, we are not trying to touch gender, politics, caste, religion in any way. Also, we are trying to do is not offer you any kind of a fixed model of thought. All we are trying to do is to present you with the ideas to bridge the gap between the in and out transformation, which somebody mentioned yesterday, and the social transformation. We are trying to put across mysticism and art as a creative forces, which can help to cross the barriers of the robotic kind of lifestyle that we are living in this globalized world. Further, also defining mysticism as an earthly experience. Example, it can be enjoying a morning walk. It can be looking at a sunset. It is personalized. It is to everybody. Spirituality, if we talk about that, we have been talking about since yesterday, is more of a process that we indulge in. But for a normal human being who has no edges to philosophy, who has no edges to religion, who has no edges to any such kind of a thinking, if I talk about in the Indian context, what is it all about? Further, and finally, as I said, we are earthly beings and need to live with Earth and live together on Earth, which is a social, political domain, and also transform our life on this very Earth. So with this, I would like to put across a quote, which is by Amir Khusro. I will try to speak it in Farsi and translate it to you. It was said in the praise of Kashmir, long back. It's called as, it says, Ar gar firdaus barue zami ast, hami asto, hami asto, hami asto. So if I relate it to our nature and our life, it means if there is a paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is this. Thank you so much. And with this, I leave you with another question to think upon, because since we want to provoke creative thinking. So this is, what is real spirituality, but art of union with reality for all of you. Thank you.
Balance. Yoga Nidra is a state of wholeness where the mind is set aside and we can perceive our being. So when we think of yoga and like art, culture, mysticism, ultimately it's about returning to balance. So what's been happening is we talk about meditation, entering states of meditation where we want to go, but often for people that's very tough. You ask someone new to sit in a seated meditation and they're going to struggle because A, they don't know where to go. B, the mind is always engaged. So they're always like, am I meditating, am I not? Yoga Nidra is a way to enter that state without having to do anything. And what it does is it makes use of the biological state that we already have. So when we are falling asleep, there are steps we follow that we don't even know of. So we start from our beta state where we're thinking, then our mind slows down into alpha state, and we're slowly dropping into theta state. And there is a state just before sleep where we are naturally disengaging from our thoughts. So we don't know about this. It just happens. It's not like as we're falling asleep every night, we say, oh, at this stage, I'm going to disengage from my thoughts, and boom, I'm going to fall asleep. That doesn't happen. It just happens. So Yoga Nidra is that state where we naturally disengage from our thoughts. So it is an effective and effortless way of meditation. And the process that we teach at the Amrit Yoga Institute guides you there effortlessly. The other advantage of being in that state is we can set intentions. So if I'm awake and I want to make certain changes in my life or a way of living, and I say tomorrow morning I wake up and say, I think I'm going to make certain changes in my life. While I'm awake trying to make these changes, my mind's going to tell me 20 reasons why that's not going to work, or another 20 reasons why that's a great idea, but regardless, my mind is engaged. When we drop into that state where the mind is no longer engaged, we can set intentions there, and we can make changes in our lives. So that's a state. Now the question is, why am I even talking about Yoga Nidra, right? Like, why does it even matter? It's because of this concept that's very often used today called stress. Everyone talks about stress. I'm stressed, I'm stressed. What does that even mean? And as Dr. Sharat has mentioned, there's this whole concept of everybody working. The point is work isn't bad. Alone by itself, being tense and working isn't a bad concept because we have to work, we have to do things. If it's not balanced by relaxation, that's where the problem comes in. So if I go to work the whole day and I work and do some things, I have to survive in this world. But if I don't counterbalance it with relaxation, that's where the imbalance comes in. And that excess tension that I hold in my body is called stress. So working and tension alone isn't stress. It's not being balanced equally by relaxation. That excess tension is called stress. So the human body's actually been designed to work with a balance of tension and relaxation. The human heart, which I hope nobody's ever seen, but if you've seen a video of it, it works like this. There's tension, there's relaxation. There's tension, relaxation. So the human heart actually won't work if it's only in tension or if it's only in relaxation. It's this balance, and if it continues in this balance, it can go on for about 120 years. So in yoga, we're not saying just do or just relax. We're saying find the balance between the two. So another example is you see, a cat just lounging around, sitting around, doing nothing, and a dog walks by. And the cat just goes into the state of tension, right? And then the dog leaves and the cat relaxes. Now imagine if the cat, tomorrow the cat said, you know what, I'm just going to hang out here just in case another dog comes by. It sounds ridiculous, right? But we do that. We get stuck in that state, so the threat has left, but we stay in that state of tension, and we're like, just in case, but we're not even aware of it, right? So we say, oh, the threat has left, but my muscles are tense, my breathing is shallow. So we don't know how actually to go back into relaxation. And sometimes you may have actually experienced relaxation, but because you're not used to it, you might think you're tired. So you might tell your friends, I'm feeling really tired, but what you really are probably just relaxed. But we're not used to it. So when we are teaching Yoga Nidra, it's really to restore this balance. And the way it happens is, if someone comes up to us and says, how do I relax? You can't do relaxation. That's just not possible. What we in Yoga Nidra do is we remove the doing. So there's a process that we bring you down into where it starts with, you start with the grosser body. So you do tension and relaxation. This is what our body naturally knows. Then we go into the subtler stages of energy and like breath. So relaxation breath. And that allows the energy to move through the body. And then we go, like we do the 61 points or other techniques where you guide you through the body where energy is allowed to flow through the different parts. And then finally, there comes a point where you realize you're not doing, you're just being. So once you've dropped into these stages, you reach a point in Yoga Nidra where you do experience your connection to source. And that's the state where when we talk about anything, politics, art, culture, mysticism, it is the unification of your being with the source. So in Yoga Nidra, we're guiding you through that. And there you can set intentions and bring them into the wakeful state. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Sandeep, and I'm an entrepreneur. But I have a spiritual bent of mind. So thanks, Professor Gupta, for calling me here in front of this esteemed audience. So, being an entrepreneur, right, I look at things from a business, point of view. So my talk, I guess, the next 5 or 7 minutes, it's going to be a little different. So I'll be basically exploring how, why spirituality isn't going to the scale at which, it could go in the modern era, in the era of technology. Where is it lacking that, it isn't reaching the common people, right? So I'll just start with a small anecdote from the life of John Lennon. So when he was young, he just started schooling. His teacher gave the class an assignment on, what do you want to be when you grow up? So, a lot of kids wrote, different things, professor, engineer. So John wrote that I want to be happy when I grow up. So the teacher said, what? Happy? So the teacher asked that you haven't understood the assignment, John. So John said back that maybe you haven't understood life. That's the essence of life, right? You want to be happy. I mean, it could be happy in his own terms, or it could be joyfulness in our own terms, It could be oneness, it could be mindfulness, it could be the heartfulness session that we had yesterday, So the definition or the term could be different, but it is one of the key things, happiness or oneness, to be there, in your life. So, I mean, if we overall look at things, then his teacher would have been happier if he had said that I want to be a sports person, Then she could have measured that, okay, my pupil over here grew up to be a sportsman, or he grew up to be a businessman. And they could measure, that he's a businessman with, he grew up to be a Steve Jobs with so much of wealth, So what are the 3 questions in life? How happy are you? Can I measure it? Maybe not. How wealthy are you? If I were to ask anyone over here, you can just check your bank balance, the car, the house that you have. You'll have a number. You'll have a number and you'll feel, good about it, or maybe, you'll find ways to improve upon it. Because there is a certain bit of measurability to it. If I was to ask about, how healthy are you? Again, I am 6 foot tall, I don't have cholesterol, so I can again measure it. So all I'm trying to say is that there is no measurement, a concrete measurement to the happiness or to the joyfulness. That is where I think a new concept is needed, where the academics and business have to interact and arrive at, certain things. Because if we were to go back a few thousand years ago, the ancient man was as puzzled with fire, or with lightning or anything like that, as he was with his internal heart and mind, a few thousand years ago. But the technology and science evolved. It evolved. Today we have automobile, we have aeroplanes. The technology has evolved wherein we can measure things in the outer aspects, but we still can't measure the inner aspects. So I think if we could, work towards that, find a measurement index for happiness or joyfulness, it could really spread to the masses. So that's the first point that I wanted to bring. Then the other part which I wanted to bring is, if at all I could measure it, or if sage Patanjali could, a few thousand years ago, codify the entire system of yoga into 196 sutras, maybe we need to have sage Patanjali again in this era for the modern life, who could bring all those concepts for the modern man, because the things are a little different. And the third thing that I wanted to discuss was, in this new era, in this era where the models of working are totally different. We're living in the era of, let's say, Uber and Airbnb, right? Wherein, you're not dependent on one person or one company. It's a sharing economy. One person sitting in India over here could be talking to someone in the Netherlands and figure out a home over there, right? So that's what we were discussing yesterday. So similarly, if we look at spiritual and meditation concepts, can we classify different personality types? It's not like one thing fits everyone. A transcendental kind of a meditation could be good for a certain kind of people. A certain guru, a certain swami could connect with a certain kind of people, but there's no science behind it. I've got to go out, explore, it's a hit and trial. I could be going to 10 gurus, to figure out the one who fits for me, for my personality type. But there's no such science out there. So maybe we need to connect, again, it's an interaction between the academia and maybe, turned into a business model, because business models help you scale to a certain extent. So if, we could go out, so we know Ayurveda, right? So there are three personality types in Ayurveda. There's the Vat, Pitta, and the Kapha. So you know that which personality type would need what kind of medicine in which season. The science is very refined over there. So if you were to classify personality types, the spiritual personality types, things will be much, much easier. So let's say if there was a personality type A, B, C, and we were to connect it with which kind of meditation tool, would work good for a type A, for a type B, because there are hundreds of tools out there. So we need the classification of personality types, the tools, and maybe eventually to the gurus also. Because the gurus, the swamis, the religious people, they master certain things, and that applies to a certain class of people. So maybe the solution eventually, one of the solutions we can evaluate is connecting these things, just like a Ola or a Uber or a Ola kind of a space. Okay, with that I would like to end this thing and maybe take it up in the questions. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all my speakers, and I'd like to have a little time for questions, as much time as we can perhaps have. So please start with whatever questions anyone has.
Yeah, this is for the two at the end. Hello? Hello? Yes, hello. Hi, this is for Dr. Clammer and PhD student, I'm sorry. What would a politics without power look like concretely force, we want to somehow kind of resist this. How would you have a politics of resistance without power? I'm thinking of, strikes, for example, are a way of people taking power for themselves against, aggressive forces, for example. How would you have a political resistance without power?
Briefly, I think you can have power with rather than power over.
Okay.
And actually, in one word, that would be my answer to you. Ananta. As usual, you have a question.
Thank you so much. My query, beginning with our sister about Yoga Nidra. Now, what are the processes of initiating this process of Yoga Nidra? And whether in that process, you also bring different kind of methodologies. For example, dream and dream work, and how does one attend to different layers of consciousness in the Indic tradition. There is a thought about Turiya state, where you are beyond consciousness and unconsciousness. And in what way you initiate people to reach that. My query to Shiv Jot is that, thank you so much, both Shiv Jot and John. Now your conclusion with Amir Khusru, I think it is a deep challenge. If there is a heaven on earth, but then what is the state of Kashmir today? So therefore, thinking about politics of mysticism, then in what way, for example, we can build on mystical forces, like, and my quick related query to John is that this very language of politics of mysticism, in the spirit of going beyond power, now what would be contours of a mystical politics? Therefore, politics of mysticism can have a danger of reducing the mystical to the political. Therefore, elaborating the pathway of a mystical politics is also the call here.
I would like to answer your question, sir. When I mentioned that couplet, I mentioned it with the thought that it reflects about a life on earth. Mysticism, as we mentioned earlier in our presentation, that with that we do not refer to any kind of spiritual, any kind of alienated experiences. We are talking about the general life that we live, because we people, as human beings, are with a limited knowledge. Expanding our knowledge is today dependent upon scriptures, on books, on the various ways we do that. What I wanted to say through that quotation is that if we talk about paradise, if we talk about good life, if we talk about those experiences that we are discovering, everybody of us is discovering, either through spirituality, either through meditation, or whatever way, the paradise that we are discovering is here, is within us, is among us. The things that we were talking yesterday about I see into you, you see into me. We can't talk into, the philosophy cannot be taken on a social level, on a general level. We need to be more common about these things. So that's why I mentioned that if we need to see the paradise in the world, this is the paradise where we are living. We are in conflict within each other, within ourselves. So once we do not sort out those, we do not be clear about what we want to portray, there is no point of spirituality, there is no point of mysticism, there is no point of anything in life. This life on earth is itself a big ground where we need to understand that we all are human beings. We are earthly human beings, but blessed with the capacity to think beyond, because we are highly evolutionized. That's my answer. That's why I portray that quote. And when you're talking about Kashmir, as I mentioned when I was ending the presentation, I am not talking from the perspective of culture, politics, religion, caste. I'm just talking about how, as generally we are, earthly beings, and how the transformation should take not individually, not socially, but it has to be within ourselves. We all need to understand these facts. That is spirituality. That is respecting each other, and that is being mystic about our thoughts. Thank you so much.
So in our process of yoga nidra, we do use intentions and affirmations, and we guide people down to subconscious states, not unconscious. So the idea is that at that subconscious level, you are still connected to the person delivering the yoga nidra. So you can't actually do a yoga nidra yourself, because then your mind is engaged. So you listen to a tape or you listen to someone, and you're guiding someone down to different levels of consciousness, down to the subconscious state just before sleep, where the goal is to set the intentions and affirmations, and then we guide people out. Does that help?
Thank you very much. We seem to have managed just within the time we were allotted. So I'd like to thank all the speakers and all of you. Thank you very much.